As of today, there's 2.1 million people in the country who have expired or expiring visas. The government doesn't have a plan to have temporary mean temporary. We've seen the asylum system extremely abused. And at the same time, they're still sitting very high levels of immigration without undertaking any sort of reform. We're not just opposing liberal, poor policies, we're proposing smart solutions like the end of the temporary foreign worker programs, changes to birthright citizenship.
What do you think is the biggest immigration story in Canada right now?
Journalism commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
You have to rebuild the foundation. You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask, do you think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged? I'm Cantin-Nantel here at the Conservative Convention in Calgary. One issue that has become very prominent in Canada in the last few years has been immigration, and this comes amidst the Liberals under Trudeau opening the floodgates to massive amounts of immigration, arguably uncontrolled immigration. And while I'm here at the convention, there's someone I really wanted to speak to about immigration with, and that is Michelle Rempel Garner. She's the Conservative MP for Calgary Nose Hill, but she's also the Conservative Party immigration critic, and she has done a lot legislatively and in the House of Commons to fight back and criticize and resist the Liberals' immigration agenda and propose some new solutions. So we talked about that with her, and I also asked her, what does she think is the biggest immigration story in Canada? Without further ado, here is our conversation. Well, I'm here at the Conservative Party convention with Member of Parliament and immigration critic Michelle Rempel Garner, who is a Calgary MP. Michelle, let's start with immigration. You've been appointed the immigration critics. There are some people who argue that immigration is the issue, and that if there's an election, a snap election, it could actually be kind of a silent majority issue, because a lot of Canadians seem to be frustrated with the situation of immigration under the Liberals. What do you think of that? Do you think immigration is a major issue? Do you think it is the issue?
It actually is a huge issue. If you look at public opinion polling, it's consistently in the top 5 or top 6 concerns of Canadians. And I think that's because under the last, well, I don't think I know, under the last decade of Liberal government policy, if I had to boil it down, it's the Liberal government set policies such that too many people came into the country too fast for housing, healthcare, and jobs to keep up. And that's not fair to anybody. So, we realize that as Conservatives, and that's why throughout the fall, we have been proposing very bold but also common sense policies to restore order and fairness to Canada's immigration system.
Well, we know that Trudeau had opened the floodgates to very, very large amounts of immigration. Carney, on a lot of issues, has been trying to position himself as more moderate. How would you compare the Carney government's approach to immigration to the Trudeau government's approach to immigration?
Well, first of all, like every other issue, there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. He appointed a very weak minister into the what I think is, as you rightly said, one of the most critical portfolios in government right now. And here's the reality. As of today, there's 2.1 million people in the country who have expired or expiring visas. The government doesn't have a plan to have temporary mean temporary, which is what's already in the law. So to get people to leave as their visas expire. We've seen the asylum system extremely abused. And at the same time, they're still sitting very high levels of immigration without undertaking any sort of reform. So again, we're not just opposing liberal, poor policies. We're proposing smart solutions like the end of the temporary foreign worker programs, changes to birthright citizenship, and I could go on and on.
Yes, and we will talk a bit about those proposals in just a moment. But first, you touched a bit about the minister. What do you think of the performance of Carney's immigration minister? Do you think she's competent?
No, she's terrible. What more is there to say? The proof's in the pudding. She's terrible.
So, asylum seekers. This was one of the big issues with Trudeau. They would come in on Roxham Road and they would claim asylum from the U.S. What do you think needs to be done on asylum? Because it is a major issue.
Well, first of all, we did propose a large suite of proposals to reform the asylum system. These were done in the context of Bill C-12 and amendments. Where to start on that? reforming the benefit system that asylum seekers, particularly failed asylum seekers, can get. We've opposed using tax dollars to put asylum seekers in hotel rooms. So that those are some of the incentives for people to abuse the system who might not have valid claims. We've also undertaken other measures like proposing that asylum seekers have to make their claim on the record when they enter Canada, so they can't game the system afterwards. And then as recently as 2 weeks ago, I proposed new measures to stop new waves of folks illegally crossing the border, particularly in regions near Roxham Road, to prevent the backlog from further growing. And just to put it in perspective, there are currently over 300,000 people who have made asylum claims. Many of those are people who have had expired student visas as well.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem that the government has to get on top of.
Yes, something that we're seeing a lot in the news nowadays are immigrants who are committing crimes and they're getting lighter sentences so that they don't face deportation. What's going on there, and are you doing something to address that?
Sure. So, the vast majority of people who come to Canada, through legal means are law-abiding, and they respect Canadian law. However, you're right, we are seeing many instances, like lots of instances, where non-citizens are being convicted of serious crimes and then are given more lenient sentences in order to avoid deportation or, quote, immigration consequences. Yes. I proposed a private member's bill which would end that practice, and that'll be up for a vote in the next few weeks in Parliament.
Yes, and if you want to learn more about that, I made a video talking about that, which I will link in this video, so be sure to also check that out. Michelle, there's also the Birthright Citizenship argument. You are opposed to the current Birthright Citizenship status quo. Talk to me about that.
So the Conservative Party of Canada, we did put forward a proposal to move Canada in alignment with virtually every other country in the world, which states that in order to pass citizenship down to your descendant, at least one parent has to be at minimum a permanent resident. That's a bar that most other peer countries to Canada has. We think that that's entirely reasonable, and so we did put that forward as an amendment to Bill C3, the Liberals' chain migration bill. The Liberals did defeat that amendment.
There was talk this weekend of having the Conservative Party support deportations of foreign criminals. Do you support that?
Well, first of all, as we just talked about, I think that there are issues within the judicial system that allow or encourage giving more lenient sentences to non-citizens who are convicted of serious crimes. Obviously, again, just to reemphasize, I have a private member's bill on that. I do think that when somebody commits a crime on Canadian soil, they should be brought to justice under the Canadian legal system, but then also face deportation consequences. My concern would be, like, let's take, for example, if somebody runs a big scam ring, right? And then instead of facing justice in Canada, they're sent somewhere that they might not face justice, they could reoffend without any sort of penalty. So those are the sort of considerations that you have to take into consideration right now. But at the end of the day, the principle is this, is that a non-citizen who commits a crime in Canada, there are laws in place that have been on the books for decades, which says, if you take advantage and work against the rule of law in Canada as a visitor or a guest here, that there are consequences for that. Those need to be, reestablished and enforced, and that's what we've been pushing for throughout the fall. But at the end of the day, the principle is to ensure that offenders or convicted criminals face justice, which is something that across the board the Liberals have been opposed to over the last decade.
So what do you think, we've talked about a bunch of different immigration issues, what do you think is the biggest immigration story in Canada right now?
It's a great question. Oftentimes when we talk about immigration, it comes up in terms of numbers or statistics, but it's really a human issue, right? The human face. And I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's that the Liberals have ruined the system so much that it's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to newcomers. Like, I've heard, thousands of stories about temporary foreign workers being abused. I've heard... it's such a disaster. But I think, the way I would say it is, don't just look at the mass statistics. It's also about, like, what the impact has been on Canada's social cohesion, our social fabric, emergency rooms. And it's just the unfairness and injustice to everybody is, I think, a story that really needs to be told.
Lastly, maybe moving away from immigration, let's talk about Substack. You've been
Yeah.
writing on Substack.
You too.
Yes, I have as well. But
did really well.
thank you, thank you. You have 100,000 subscribers on Substack, and in many ways, like you are now your own media. So talk to me about that. Why you got on Substack and the impact or what this means now that MPs are able to use this type of medium to put information out.
Well, I've been around in Parliament for a while. And, when I started in Parliament, it was the news cycle was you'd wake up in the morning, there'd be a newspaper print article. This makes me sound so old. It was not that long ago. You'd have the day to respond to it. And that's just not the case anymore. And then we've also seen, under the Liberal government, a lot of censorship bills. They've promised more, which makes it harder for independent media to tell local stories or, viewpoints that aren't necessarily what the ruling Liberal Party's dogma is or hold the government to account. So, I took it upon myself to say, look, the job of an MP obviously is to legislate, to hold the government to account, but part of that is communicating. And, this is why over the last many years I've built up many platforms because I think it's important to talk to people no matter where they're at. I believe in Substack because I think that communicating in long form written pieces is important. I also do a podcast. And it's been encouraging to see that growth. Like 100,000 subscribers on Substack. It allows me to, I put out a response to Mark Carney's speech last week, which was read across my platforms, I think 1.7 million times. That's incredible. And I'm very grateful to have platforms like that at my fingertips, which are free to use, by the way, and incredible. But it's important. I want to congratulate you and other young writers for making that jump. And I think that type of medium allows for legitimate debate of ideas. So good for you.
Well, this was Michelle Rempel Garner. Michelle, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Michelle Rempel Garner. If you want to follow what she does, I highly recommend subscribing to her Substack. I'll leave the link below. Be sure to subscribe to my Substack as well. And if you enjoy this independent, non-government funded coverage of the convention, then be sure to subscribe and get a paid subscription if you're feeling generous. And consider supporting our convention fund because it costs about $3,000 to cover this convention. Thank you and God bless.